When Donald Trump took office, he promised a dramatic shift in American trade policy. His administration argued that for decades, the United States had been taken advantage of by other nations. They pointed to trade deficits and the loss of manufacturing jobs as evidence. The solution, they declared, was a bold and aggressive strategy. This strategy centered on the use of tariffs. These are taxes on imported goods. The goal was to make foreign products more expensive. This, in theory, would encourage American consumers and businesses to buy American-made products instead. It was a plan rooted in a philosophy of America first, aimed at protecting and reviving domestic industries. The Trump administration began rolling out these tariffs in 2018. They did not just target one country, they targeted a wide range of trading partners. Steel imports, aluminum imports from around the world, including from close allies in the European Union, were hit with heavy taxes. China faced a particularly sweeping set of tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. The administration believed this economic pressure would force other countries to change their own trade practices. The move was a significant departure from decades of U.S. policy, which had generally favored free trade and lower tariffs. The stated objectives were clear and ambitious. The message was one of economic nationalism. The world watched to see if the gamble would pay off. So what exactly is a tariff? In simple terms, a tariff is a tax. It is a tax imposed by a government on goods that are imported from another country. For example, if the U.S. government places a 25% tariff on a car imported from Germany, the company importing that car must pay a tax equal to 25% of the car's value. This additional cost is usually passed on to the consumer. The German car that once cost $40,000 might now cost $50,000 in an American showroom. Tariffs have a long history. They have been used by nations for centuries to raise revenue and, more commonly, to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. The primary reason a government uses tariffs is a concept called protectionism. The idea is to shield a country's own businesses and workers from cheaper or more numerous foreign products. By making imported goods more expensive, tariffs make domestically produced goods look more attractive by comparison. If the German car now costs $50,000, a similar American-made car priced at $45,000 suddenly becomes the more affordable option. The hope is that this will lead consumers to buy American. This increased demand for domestic products is then expected to boost local factories, create jobs, and strengthen the national economy. It's a way of building an economic wall around a country's industries. However, this tool is a double-edged sword. Protecting one part of the economy can often lead to unintended and costly consequences for other parts. The use of tariffs is not a simple fix. It creates a complex web of economic ripple effects. The vision presented by the Trump administration was one of American economic renewal. The promises were bold and centered on the idea of bringing prosperity back to the nation's industrial heartland. President Trump and his advisors argued that the tariffs would act as a powerful catalyst for job creation. By making imported steel more expensive, aluminum more expensive, and other goods more expensive, American companies that produce these same goods would see a surge in demand. This, in turn, was expected to lead them to reopen shuttered factories, fire up dormant production lines, and, most importantly, hire back thousands of American workers. The narrative was one of reclaiming lost ground in the global economic battle. Another key promise was the shrinking of the U.S. trade deficit. The trade deficit occurs when a country buys more from the world than it sells. The administration viewed this deficit as a sign of economic weakness, like a household spending more than it earns. The tariffs were designed to attack this problem directly. By making imports more costly, the plan was to reduce Americans' appetite for foreign goods. At the same time, the administration believed the tariffs would give them leverage to negotiate better trade deals. These new deals, they argued, would open up foreign markets to American exports, further helping to close the trade gap and rebalance the scales of global commerce. The positive effects were expected to be felt directly by American businesses. With less competition from what the administration termed unfairly priced foreign goods, domestic companies would have the breathing room to invest and expand. The theory was that this protection would foster a more robust and self-reliant industrial base. Companies would be more inclined to invest in new technology and training for their workforce. This was the America First economic model in action, using government policy to create a protected market where American ingenuity and labor could thrive without facing what were seen as predatory global practices. The Trump administration's decision to impose tariffs was not met with passive acceptance from the global community. Instead, it triggered a swift and predictable response: retaliation. Major trading partners, including the European Union, China, Canada, Mexico, did not view the U.S. tariffs as a legitimate attempt to level the playing field. They saw them as a protectionist attack on their own industries and a violation of international trade rules. In response, they implemented their own tariffs specifically targeting American-made goods. This marked the beginning of a tit-for-tat trade war, creating uncertainty and disruption across the global supply chain. The European Union's response was particularly strategic and targeted. Rather than broad tariffs, the EU picked iconic American products to tax: Harley-Davidson motorcycles, Levi's blue jeans, bourbon whiskey orange juice. The choices were not random. Many were produced in key political states in the U.S. The goal? Apply political pressure on American lawmakers by hurting home district industries. For example, the tariff on bourbon hit Kentucky, home of then-Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. This retaliation had a direct and painful impact on American exporters. Companies selling overseas suddenly found themselves at a major disadvantage. A bottle of American bourbon that was competitive in Paris became much more expensive overnight because of the EU tariff. European shoppers turned to alternatives: Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey. American farmers were also hit hard. China, a huge market for U.S. farm goods, hit American soybeans, pork, other farm goods. Soybean prices plummeted, creating a financial crisis for many Midwestern farmers. The cycle of retaliation created instability for businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. An American firm might import parts from Europe, assemble the product in the U.S., then export the finished good back to Europe. The trade war wasn't a simple contest. It disrupted producers and consumers alike. When the tariffs were implemented, the question on every economist's mind was, who would actually pay for them? The administration suggested foreign countries like China and the European Union would bear the cost. However, real-world data quickly painted a very different picture. Overwhelmingly, the cost of the tariffs was paid by American importers, and subsequently by American consumers and American businesses. A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that by the end of 2018, United States importers were bearing virtually the entire cost of the tariffs. There was little evidence that foreign exporters were lowering their pre-tariff prices to absorb the new tax. The tariff was simply added to the final cost. This meant the tariffs acted as a direct tax increase on the American economy. Multiple economic analyses confirmed this finding. Researchers at Princeton, researchers at Columbia, researchers at the United States Federal Reserve, they calculated about $3 billion per month in added tax costs, and another $1.4 billion per month in deadweight loss. By 2019, the total cost had climbed significantly. A J.P. Morgan Chase report estimated the tariffs could cost the average American household up to $1,000 per year. This was the measured impact on the United States economy. The data on trade flows also showed the intended effects were not materializing as hoped. Imports from China did decrease in some tariff-targeted categories, but that trade was often just diverted. United States companies started importing more from Vietnam, from Mexico, and from Taiwan. United States production did not necessarily increase to fill the gap. The overall United States trade deficit did not shrink. In fact, the total goods trade deficit grew to a record high. Retaliatory tariffs from other countries suppressed American exports. The impact on United States manufacturing employment, the central promise of the policy, was also muted. There were small gains in protected industries like steel and in aluminum. But these gains were largely offset by job losses in other manufacturing sectors using those metals as inputs. A Federal Reserve Board study concluded the tariffs led to a net loss of manufacturing jobs in the United States. The economic data tells one part of the story, but the real impact of the tariffs was felt in the price tags of everyday items. The costs were not always obvious, but they accumulated across a wide range of consumer goods. Consider the household laundry room. In early 2018, the administration imposed tariffs of up to 50% on imported washing machines. The goal was to protect American manufacturers like Whirlpool. A study by economists at the University of Chicago found washing machine prices rose about 12%, or an average of $86 per unit. Crucially, the price of dryers, which weren't subject to the tariff, also increased by a similar amount as manufacturers raised prices in tandem. This pattern repeated itself across countless other products. The tariffs on steel and aluminum, for instance, had a ripple effect. These metals are fundamental components in cars, appliances, and even canned goods. American automakers reported that the steel tariffs cost them roughly $1 billion each, a cost that inevitably influenced the sticker price of new cars and trucks. Beverage companies faced higher costs for aluminum cans, which translated into slightly higher prices for beer and soda. Even products that seemed unrelated were affected. The broad tariffs on Chinese goods included items like furniture, bicycles, luggage, and vacuum cleaners, making all of them more expensive for American shoppers. The European Union's retaliatory tariffs also had a direct effect, though on a different set of goods. For American consumers with a taste for European products, the cost of living went up. French wine, Italian cheese, Spanish olive oil, a wheel of Parmigiano Reggiano, or a bottle of Bordeaux that was once an affordable luxury suddenly carried a premium price tag, a direct consequence of the escalating trade dispute. These costs were passed directly from the importer to the retailer and then to the consumer. The impact also extended to home improvement and construction. The tariffs on Chinese goods included a vast array of materials and tools used by DIYers and contractors. For a family planning a kitchen remodel or a contractor building a new home, these accumulated costs could add thousands of dollars to a project's budget. For the average American family, the consequences of the trade war were not abstract economic theories, but a real and measurable financial pressure. The rising prices on a vast array of goods, washing machines, groceries, auto parts acted like a slow-moving but persistent tax. While a few extra dollars on a single purchase might seem minor, the cumulative effect across hundreds of different items each month resulted in a significant squeeze on household budgets. Families found that their paychecks did not stretch as far as they used to. The cost of maintaining their standard of living had quietly but steadily increased, leaving less money available for savings, debt repayment, or discretionary spending. This financial strain was not distributed equally across the population. Economic studies consistently showed that the tariffs disproportionately burdened lower and middle-income families. These households spend a larger percentage of their income on essential goods, food, clothing, basic appliances, many of which were directly or indirectly affected by the new taxes. Wealthier households, which spend a smaller portion of their income on such goods, were better able to absorb the price increases. This meant that the trade policy intended to help the American worker ended up functioning as a regressive tax, hitting the pocketbooks of those with the least financial cushion the hardest. The pain was also felt in the form of reduced choices and opportunities. The retaliatory tariffs imposed by the European Union and China on American agricultural products created a crisis in rural America. For farming families, this was not just about tighter budgets. It was an existential threat to their livelihoods. The collapse in export markets for soybeans and pork led to falling incomes, mounting debt, and in some cases, farm bankruptcies. The United States government implemented a multi-billion-dollar aid program to compensate farmers for their losses, but this was a temporary fix paid for by taxpayers. Furthermore, the uncertainty created by the trade war had a chilling effect on business investment and hiring. When companies are unsure about the future costs of their supplies or their access to foreign markets, they become hesitant to make long-term commitments. They might postpone building a new factory, delay the purchase of new equipment, or pause hiring new employees. This climate of instability acts as a drag on economic growth, which ultimately affects job security and wage growth for everyone. Looking back at the results of the tariff-centric trade policy, the conclusion drawn by most economists is that the strategy did not work as intended. The primary goals, a significant reduction in the United States trade deficit, a major revitalization of the manufacturing sector, were not achieved. The trade deficit, in fact, continued to grow. While some jobs were created in protected industries like steel, these gains were more than offset by losses in other sectors. Those sectors faced retaliatory tariffs or had to pay higher costs for raw materials. The ledger shows that the tariffs functioned primarily as a tax on American consumers and businesses, rather than a cost borne by foreign competitors. In a deeply interconnected global economy, trade wars have no clear winners. The tit-for-tat retaliation showed other nations will not passively accept unilateral tariffs. Instead, they will strike back, often targeting politically sensitive industries in the aggressor nation. This harms American exporters, farmers, motorcycle manufacturers, and ultimately undermines the very economic strength the policy was meant to bolster. The experience showed that supply chains are global and complex. Disrupting them with broad tariffs creates costly inefficiencies and uncertainty that ripples throughout the economy, hurting far more than it helps. Another key takeaway is the importance of understanding who truly pays for tariffs. The notion that foreign countries would absorb the cost proved to be incorrect. The economic evidence is clear. The financial burden fell squarely on the domestic economy. This highlights the need for policymakers to be transparent about the true costs of such policies. Protecting one industry from foreign competition is not a free lunch. It imposes costs on other industries, and on every consumer who buys an imported good. Future trade policy discussions must honestly weigh these costs against any potential benefits. Ultimately, the experience serves as a cautionary tale. Addressing unfair trade practices and supporting domestic workers, using broad tariffs as the primary tool proved to be counterproductive and costly. A more effective approach, as many trade experts say, involves targeted actions and international cooperation. Building coalitions with allies to pressure countries over specific trade violations, negotiating multilateral agreements, can achieve desired changes without triggering damaging global trade wars. The lesson for the future: strategic engagement and collaboration beat building economic walls.